Thanks.
Good, thanks, Hunter.
Doing great, Hunter. Thank you.
Good. Glad to hear it. Well, I will pass it over to y'all. I'm here in the back end if you need anything.
Thank you so much for that amazing introduction, and thank you for having us, Power to Fly. We're really happy to be here on the Pride Summit. We are here today to talk to you a little bit about bringing the LGBTQ community together and breaking those barriers, particularly in the tech industry. So we're together for the next hour-ish. What I will do is do a quick intro to myself, although Hunter did an amazing job, so I won't spend too long on that. Then I will introduce you to ServiceNow very quickly as well and let you know a little bit about what we do. And then we will hand over to our panel and they can do some introductions as well. And then we're going to have a conversation for the next hour. And this really is an interactive session, so please do keep your questions coming in as we go through it. We will try to get to as many of them as possible and disperse them throughout. We've also left some time at the end to kind of answer any other questions we've got. So yeah, please do keep them coming in. So thank you so much. As mentioned, my name is Nazmir. My pronouns are he, they. I am part of the ServiceNow family. I've been in the role of the EMEA lead and a global DE&I business partner. I am a gay man. I am a second generation Bangladeshi immigrant as well. And so a little bit about my personal kind of background, you know, having lots of different elements to my identity that sometimes traditionally don't kind of fit together, was always a point of kind of conversation for me in my story, and thinking a bit around, you know, where do I fit in? And it wasn't really until I realized that I can forge my own path and I don't have to sit in one box or the other, that I realized that actually I can unlock that power, not just in myself, but help others to unlock that in them as well. And that's how I kind of fell into the world of DE&I. So, you know, what makes you different gives you that power. So please do lean in on that. So before we do more introductions with Tonya and Marco, I wanted to share a very quick introduction to ServiceNow. So ServiceNow, we like to say that we make the world of work better for everyone. We were founded in 2004 by our amazing founder, Fred Luddy. And really our purpose is to help organizations and employees seamlessly work through digital workflows. So if you have a little think about everything you do in your day-to-day life, daily tasks, think of them as workflows, from onboarding employees during the COVID pandemic, scheduling a doctor's appointment through an online portal, or even ordering your favorite Starbucks drink through an online app. You know, these processes are all built on what we call workflows, and they help to spur innovation and make that world just a little bit more seamless for all of us as users. We work with about 80% of the world's Fortune 500 companies. So people like Starbucks, Delta, Overstock, Wayfair, even the NBA and the WNBA, and also the Zoom, the platform we're on today. So if you're part of an organization, if you encounter a brand, the likelihood is that you've also encountered some of the amazingness that ServiceNow brings to the world. So our discussion today, let's move on to the topic. It's all about breaking barriers in the tech industry for the LGBTQ plus community. We know that the world of tech moves really, really fast. And if you've been anywhere online or checking out the news, then diversity, equity, and inclusion is also really evolving at a really fast rate at the moment. Our understanding of experiences, language, you know, anything like that really is kind of moving, feels like at a really rapid pace. It's Pride Month as well. So firstly, happy Pride to everyone out there. Hope you're having a great month and hope you've had the chance to show up in some way, whether you're part of the community or as an ally. Naturally, we're probably seeing a lot more conversation online about LGBTQ identities, but alongside the celebrations, you know, we also do see maybe not so much progress in certain areas, and it's hard to ignore sometimes the prevalence of anti-LGBTQ rhetoric that might exist online and elsewhere. Internally in organizations as well, we've made loads and loads of progress. I hope your organizations or organizations you're affiliated with are doing something to help commemorate Pride. But we know that there's much more we can do, right? This industry definitely has a way to go, not just with LGBTQ inclusion and identities as well, but for all different underserved kind of identities. So that brings us on to introducing our amazing panel. So firstly, I'd like to just say a quick hello to both Tonya and Marco. Tonya, if you just want to say a quick hi and introduce yourself.
Yeah, so Hunter did a great job already. But as he said, I am, my name's Tanya, and I am the proud mama of a couple of awesome teenagers, one of who came out as transgender a few years ago, also during a very, very difficult mental health crisis for our family. So, I didn't, this becoming an ally wasn't something I thought I would need to do in life, but it's become something that's really important of my job as a mom. I also do a lot of teaching. I teach a lot of, SAFE classes, which is a framework for, improving how teams work together. So I find that, being inclusive and, really focusing on my allyship there too is really important to making sure that my classes are successful, my team is successful. It's just become a part of daily life for me. Marco. Yeah.
Thanks, Tanya. Yep. Also giving thanks to the Hunter for the intro. Appreciate that. I, I've been in tech for a while now, and also advocating um, as a voice for the LGBTQ plus community, but it hasn't always been that way. It took a straight, white, cisgendered male to encourage me to be my authentic self at work. And through that, I've been able to channel some strength in being my authentic self at work. So since then, I think that was around 2008, 2009, I've been more unapologetically me at work and striving to be a voice for change and a voice for good. So it's something that my husband and I, we just really are just trying to be ourselves in every day in the face of everything that's going on. So that's who we are, or who I am. Naz, over to you.
Thank you. I appreciate both of you for being here. And already in just introductions, I see so many great examples of allyship from within and also, as outside of the community. So, allyship to me is really around being there in service, right? And in support of others. To me, it's about intent. It's always about being intentional and kind of being that step ahead almost of seeing someone and their needs and kind of taking the time to understand what communities are experiencing. Of course, we will never be able to necessarily feel that in the same way as an individual, but I think having always talking around being like involved and supporting, and allyship is something, an ally is something I've never actually called myself. I'd always hope that the people I demonstrate allyship towards would feel that from me, but it's always interesting. I've never kind of called myself an ally to a community, but hopefully through my actions, people do feel those, typical allyship behaviors that we love to show and hope that we can kind of support others in. So Marco, I've just shared a little bit around, my take on allyship there, and you've mentioned, you supporting the LGBTQ community as well. I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about your role specifically as an ally to the LGBTQ community, considering you're also a member of it.
So for me, right, I see multiple communities within this community, within the LGBT or within the Pride community, which I like to think of it that way. There's multiple, right? There's the L, the G, the B, the T, Q, I, A plus. And I represent at least one of those communities and maybe two of those communities if the L stands for Latino, but I'm just kidding. I know it doesn't. That's fine. It's okay. But we need to show up every day, whether you're a new ally, a super ally, or act as an accomplice through allyship. There's an opportunity to support one another. I would say, especially right now, our trans voices need our support from their brothers and sisters or from their partners. An accomplice, I'm saying that in the sense of getting into some good trouble, as John Lewis once said. I think there's a way for us to continue to advocate on behalf of others, especially through speaking up when rhetoric is stated or heard while one of us is not in the room. that's, or in the Zoom meeting. I think it can be uncomfortable, but it's very necessary. So that's how I view allyship, and active allyship, actually.
I love that comment around when you're not in the room. I always think about that, you know, when we talk about the difference between sponsorship and mentorship as well, and, you know, being an active advocate for someone when they're not in the room. And also that sometimes happens because people come from different communities that sometimes don't get a seat in the room, right? And I think that's really important that an ally understands that power that they have in those moments and uses it for those reasons. So thank you so much. Tonya, I'd like to come to you a little bit and hear about your perspective on breaking barriers. So could you please tell us a little bit about your, you know, how you've kind of demonstrated allyship, how you've fallen into it, however you want to describe it, through your experiences?
Yeah, and as you said, like I don't really consider it allyship. I just consider it being a good mom, you know. And I know that not, you know, it's not something that, you know, I thought, oh, let me just become a great ally. No, it was like, how do I support my kid in living and thriving in the world and being able to live authentically as himself? And that included, you know, breaking barriers within my immediate family, educating myself, you know, encouraging my husband to educate himself, my extended family, right? I've had to hold some very hard boundaries with folks in my family, and say, hey, here's what I expect, right? We're going to show up to Thanksgiving dinner. We want to see you all, but this is what my, you know, my family needs from you. And if you can be that way, great, we'll be there. We'll, you know, we'll come. But I didn't want my kid to have to come out at Thanksgiving dinner and have this be like super weird for him. So I paved the way by making hard phone calls and saying, hey, I need you to go talk to your dad or your uncle, or like, this is what it looks like to be a family here. And I think it was important for me to do that because, number one, you know, I have a lot of family who's from Texas. They're not necessarily, I've seen some horrible things that they've written on Facebook. And so it was important for me to bring that close to them in a safe way for my kid, so that, you know, it's much harder to spew hate when that's like somebody you know and love, right? Like, no, that's my nephew. That's my, you know, my niece's son. Like, it's somebody I know and love. It's not just somebody out there. It's much harder to be hateful when it's somebody close to you. So, like I said, education, you know, advocacy, boundaries, you know, those are all barriers that we've had to overcome as a family. And then I think as we extend that out in the community, that's been, you know, advocating at school for my kid to have a bathroom that they feel comfortable going into, or, you know, advocating for, you know, my kid at work when he was being, you know, bullied for who he was, and really both encouraging him to step up, but also stepping in when my kid couldn't speak for himself or didn't feel confident in speaking for himself. So there's so many ways that we have to do this as a family, in my community, in the broader world. It's an everyday, conscious, concerted effort to pull down those walls.
Thank you so much, Tonya. Thank you for sharing just like the level of, you know, actual how personal it can be. You know, these are people in your family that, you know, have been in your family for your whole life. And I actually think sometimes that might be more challenging than challenging people outside of those barriers, right? Because there's almost like an unwritten law that's like, well, our families are right, no matter what they're saying. And, you know, why would you ever challenge me? Because we're blood. So, you know, but I think it's so important to do that in those moments. And yeah, I really respect that response. So thank you.
Tanya, no, it's really quick. I did
Yeah,
want to
please.
mention in there that, man, Tanya, that that resonated in the conversations we've had before that. It just, right now it's hitting home because we have family members who may not embrace it fully in the beginning, right, when we first come out. But I know that with my father, when I first came out to him when I was 20, right now I'm 107. When I came out at 20, you know, he said that, son, you know, it goes against the Bible. And that way, and then, you know, we had a heartbreaking moment, and then there was a period of separation. But now, you know, I think in 2019, he attended his first Pride Parade with us. And this is you know, macho Hispanic male who now is one of our biggest advocates and was the first one to text me and my husband that, hey, son, you know, in, I think it was 2015, 2016 in the States, when we could get married, he said, "Son, you can do it now. Y'all can be legit." And I'm like, "Wait, we are legit, Dad, but thank you. I love you for that." So
It took
it's
my mom a full year and a half to come around, and that was like, not because, she wasn't capable of it. I always knew she was capable of it. And I really held her like, hey, Mom, I love you. And I know that this is something that, you want to have a relationship with your grandchildren. But if, that window is closing, and if you don't walk through that door and come alongside our family, like we're all going to shut you out. We don't want to have to do that, but we will, because you're not a safe place. And I told her that. I went so far as to send her podcasts and articles and books and, all the things to say, like, this is what we need from you. I took her on walks and had conversations. I didn't let her stay in my house when she came to visit. Like, those are all the things that, like, I'm talking hard boundaries. I blocked her from my kids' phones for a while. Like, that's when you have to do that to your own mother, just to keep your kids safe. Oh, it's heartbreaking, but that's what it takes. That's, my kid couldn't do that for himself. Every time my mom would call, he would end up in a puddle on the floor in the bathroom crying. And I'm like, we've already had one suicide attempt in this house. I will not have it again. Like, that's what I need to do to keep my kids safe. So sorry.
absolutely no.
So
You're good.
much love for you, Tonya. Thank you. It's bit by bit, right? It's changing the world bit by bit, one action. Some people's journeys take a few years, Marco. Some don't take as long. Some, and I think sometimes it is about meeting people where they are and helping to unlock that empathy and that emotional piece from it. I think we'll come onto the conversation about tech a little bit further, but you mentioned around it's easier for people to post online, right? And kind of like make a comment about something rather than it be faced about their kind of family. It makes it much more real. And I think, one of the things that we have seen with the tech kind of explosion is there isn't accountability online. So you can say whatever you want and it goes into an ether and an echo chamber where you then hear those thoughts back, and it kind of has that self-fulfilling prophecy piece. So I think it's really interesting that, and we'll come on to the conversation about tech and the benefits and the not so great benefits in a little moment. But thank you, Tonya. We really appreciate you sharing. So we sometimes hear this concept of cautious optimism. It's something people, either working in the DE&I space like me or people from those underserved communities lean on quite heavily. And, Pride is definitely a time where cautious optimism continues to kind of be something that we cling on to when we see what's happened versus, where we hope to be in the future. Marco, can you tell us a little bit more around, what cautious optimism means, particularly as we are in Pride, which is generally considered, a bit of a time for hope and celebration?
Thanks for asking. I'm not the defining individual for cautious optimism, but I could, for me, it's literally, I am hopeful for change, but pragmatic in my expectations. I think that's where I feel cautious optimism. It speaks to me. There's in the moments of the current atmosphere that we're in within the United States, it's hope for change, hope for good change, that we still need to fight against the volume of anti-LGBTQ plus legislation that's coming down the pipeline and that has already taken place. But it's still also being fiercely intent on celebrating our joys that we have as individuals, with my husband, with your son.
Ooh,
He might be
Change
back.
can happen over time. Change can happen in an instant. I know at ServiceNow, not to just speak about the company and the glorious things that we do here, although we do some great things here. At ServiceNow, there is work in progress to help the burden from the individual to the organization when it comes to changing your preferred or your legal name. We're using our own platform to improve that process internally. And who knows, maybe in the future, we can share that with other organizations. But that's some of the work that keeps me hopeful for the change. But we know that there's still work to be done. So cautious optimism. It's still pushing for change and being hopeful for that change, but also setting your own expectations at the same time.
Thank you, Marco. I really appreciate that. And
Mhm.
a slight side note, Tonya, I hope you're seeing all the lovely feedback and lovely kind of support you're getting in the chat as well. Someone asking for an applause button. So there you go. There's some little small round of applause for you there.
Well, thank you. The applause goes to my kid, right? Like to be a kid who at 15 years old could feel confident enough, and I had built enough of a relationship with my kids for him to come out. And Marco talked about that cautious optimism. Like, my kid might not have been able to do that 20 or 30 years ago, right? That like we're in a space where he has the language and he's able to to explore his gender and figure out where he fits in the world. And so that does give me a lot of optimism for our future generations, that that they're going to have that language and they'll be able to find that community so that they can find their people and thrive in the world. Like that didn't exist, or it was really hard to find. If it did exist, sorry, it was just much harder to find. It was much harder to connect with people. It wasn't safe to be out in the world. And so I just think that makes me optimistic for my kids' future, but it also makes me terrified because it's not like that everywhere else. I love that there are companies like ServiceNow where they're making it, comfortable to come out and supportive and have this, the ability to be on a panel and have a pride background. Again, those things weren't there just not too long ago. And so, that all gives me hope.
Yeah, I think it's also, that's where that optimism comes from. It's about reflecting on the wins and, the places we have been and places we are now and what we've done to kind of create and uphold that. And, I think that is why there was a celebration around Pride. Yes, it's a protest, but it's also a time to think back around, actually not very long ago, we wouldn't have been safe to have come out to have celebrated or to be who we are in the places we currently are. So thank you. Right, let's talk tech. Let's move into a bit of a techie question here. So Tonya, I'm going to start with you and then we'll transition over to Marco. So what role do you think tech plays in helping to break barriers to LGBTQ inclusion, but also are there things we need to be aware of in terms of how they might uphold barriers? So positives and negatives. So over to you, Tonya.
Yeah, so tech has been one of those industries that's been really predominantly white and male, and that's really unfortunate. As a woman myself, right, that breaking in as just a white woman has been hard enough. Not even to bring up how much harder that is for somebody who's part of the LGBTQ community or Black or brown or part of a marginalized group. That's exponentially harder. So, I think one of the things I'll mention is hiring, right? Like being inclusive in your hiring. It's an action that we all have to take, right? If you've got a position open, actively recruiting members outside of your traditional white male community is really important. If you get a panel from your recruiter and it's all white males or all male, right? Like even that, like you want to make sure that you push back on that and make sure you've got an inclusive panel or candidate pool to select from, right? I think we also have to change our language. Those are some things we'll talk about a little bit later, but being really inclusive in how we recruit, how we talk to people, how we mentor folks, and really bringing up the next generation of people to be able to feel like they can step into those leadership roles, right? So generally speaking, that's much harder for somebody who's in a marginalized community, especially within the LGBTQIA community. It's not something that that they get brought. They don't get a lot of mentorship opportunities, and so that's something for us to actively pursue and help out for those of them who are not in the room. I think there's a couple of other, realizing your own personal bias. There's a great show out on Netflix around coded bias. I think I'm going to ask, Marco here a question about, some more specific technology areas. But, we're seeing a huge growth in artificial intelligence and generative AI. So Marco, let's hear from you a little bit on, specific technology areas and where bias shows up there for that community.
Yeah. Thanks, Tanya. And yeah, I watched that Coded Bias on Netflix, and that it was super eye-opening. It I think it's a few years old now, but when we think tech today and we talk algorithms and we speak AI, especially, something comes to mind where this Sam Altman, the out CEO of OpenAI, testified to Congress uh, that despite AI's useful applications, AI needs to be regulated, or else it could cause significant harm to the world. So you have the CEO saying something like this. It seems that there's also a responsibility that each of us have individually, those who actually work in the tech space, whether you're an engineer or a coder or you're teaching. I think we each have a responsibility within this industry to be hyper aware, or to at least be aware of those potential moments where what we've created, and looking at it through a different perspective so that it's embraced and different voices are heard and encouraged encouraged to speak up. So consider making every attempt to be conscious and aware um, of applying AI within your application or within your daily use. It's not perfect. There is still some things to work out there, but your perspective, your diverse perspective, your individual voice, I think, just don't let AI speak for you. Add to it, tweak it so that it makes sense. I think that's something that I think a lot of us can take as an action item, not to just click the, oh, help me improve this sentence or improve this statement or write this header, but use that feature, but at the same time, give it some thought, put your lens on it, put your perspective to it, and maybe engage others as well.
I really like that, Marco. It's a really, really important point to make. And, we've just we had an audience question come in, which says, how can we ensure that the benefits of technological advancements reach all communities and do not further deepen existing disparities? And, I'll touch on it really quickly, and then please do jump in if there's anything additional to share. And, my undergrad was actually in economics way back when I did it. And we learned a lot around technological advancements and purposefully being really intent on putting them in places where we know it would help to generate wealth in communities. So, for example, Black women in certain countries in Africa, giving them something as simple as access to a mobile phone would allow them to spend time in the home and also run business from there and be connected to their clients. And so something as simple as that. So being really intentional on who we're supporting with that technology. And, again, not to kind of toot ServiceNow's horn too much, but I know we recently created that Rise Up program, which was about getting 1 million people trained across the world on a ServiceNow platform. And now we do a lot of work in supporting, again, underserved communities, HBCUs, etc. So a lot of it is about trying to purposefully get that tech and those qualifications into the hands of people who wouldn't typically have that access, have that kind of privilege to do so. So I think it's about intention there as well. But I'd love to hear if there's anything else, Marco, Tonya, that you want to share on that question.
Yeah. Tanya, really quick, a dear friend recently shared the recording of Reshma Saujani's speech, the Smith College speech on imposter syndrome. And if you go Google that, go look it up. It's the best 10 minutes that you'll spend in helping you break through that barrier of imposter syndrome, and that it really doesn't exist, right? It's something that is constructed, it's systemic, it's put in place to suppress. So consider that. I think um, when we talk about, and just so you know, she's the founder and CEO of Girls Who Code. So listen, support organizations, whether it's through a donation or whether it's through volunteering or using um, your skill set to donate time to organizations. There's different ways to make a difference in tech.
absolutely. I think you guys covered it, so.
Great. Okay, and thank you for that question. Please do keep them coming in. We're going to talk about borders now a little bit more. And so we're talking about barriers. So let's talk about borders. We're quite an international bunch today. For those of you who might not recognize, my accent's from the UK. So I actually sit in London. And, you know, it's amazing being part of such an international organization because it really does, you know, whether you like it or not, force your hand in inclusion. You know, we have to, in order to be successful in our jobs, we have to work across borders. This is an example of it. Marco, you know, I know you as a team are probably like 8 hours behind me currently. And, you know, we've kind of made it work and had loads of times to connect on this. But, you know, I think it would be a missed opportunity not to talk about the conversation about LGBTQ inclusion across borders. So no matter whether it's a different country or in a lot of cases, you know, if you're in the US, just different states, maybe different cities, towns within a state, I'd love to hear any thoughts and examples from you about just how different LGBTQ inclusion can look based on being in different locations. So Tanya, I don't know if you want to start.
Sure. So I'm in Colorado. I'm just on the west side of Denver. And you know, Colorado, I feel very blessed to have a transgender child in Colorado. I'm going to be super honest because here it's a pretty safe community. You know, my kids, you know, high school has a gender neutral bathroom. You know, I've got an LGBTQ center right down the street from me who I can get gender affirming care in, and I can, you know, my kid has a non-binary therapist, and there's lots of things that I can get here in the Denver area, which just down the road in Colorado Springs, I can't get, right? And just, you know, across state borders, I can't get for my child. And in some states, it's even, you know, illegal for me as a parent to get my child gender affirming care. So, you know, even in a community that is inclusive, I mean, we had a major shooting last summer in Colorado Springs. It was all over the news where, you know, the one LGBTQ friendly bar in that community got attacked. And so it's terrifying, even, you know, just an hour away here in my own community, that it can be very different in terms of support, in terms of acceptance, in terms of allyship, in terms of advocacy, in terms of laws, and in terms of, you know, just things in general. So you know, like I said, I'm super grateful I live where I live, but I'm also terrifies me sometimes, just, you know, when we travel or when we go places, like I don't leave my kid's side for 5 minutes if we're in a place where it's not safe, you know. But it's different everywhere we go. And I'm part of a really awesome Facebook community for parents of non-binary and gender fluid kids. And, you know, just to hear stories from the parents around the world who do not have what we have here, and what they have to do to overcome the barriers that they have in their community, it's really eye-opening.
Thank you, Tanya. Marco?
Oh, Tanya, about that incident I believe it was last year, uh, I saw a fierce ally show up, and it was the father who happens to have a brewery company, Atrevida Brewery. He stepped in and interfered and took down the shooter himself by hand. Um, I don't have his name in front of me, but it was just a way of being that fierce ally, and that like no other that I've seen, right? He put his life on the line because I believe he did have some children or a child there who
Yeah,
is part of the community.
yeah, and
Yeah, right. So whether you're looking at it from across state borders uh, or across regional borders, I live in Dallas, Texas with my husband, who happens to be Black. And, you know, born and raised here, we both, um, we're not numb to the ignorance, but, you know, we are aware to the microaggressions and to the aggressions that happen. So we just, when we go out, you know, when we do go out, we try to see, you know, our atmosphere, and we try not to go into areas that we feel would be a danger to us. So we just try to definitely stay aware of that. But um, I think in the workplace, you know, in my role that I'm a global co-chair for our employee resource group, or employee belonging group is what we call them here, the Pride at ServiceNow group, there are opportunities that we get to work with across in different regions with different individuals, culture champions is what we call them, that are looking for guidance and ways to stand up allyship and show up as allies, or stand up safe spaces in that office or in that location. So just today, I think I learned of our Mexico City office having a Pride celebration there in the office. So we've connected with them, and hopefully we'll highlight that internally and show how we can, show support across different borders, even when sometimes it may not be wholly embraced in that state, in that region, in that country.
I think it's a really
Oh,
important. Oh, go on, Marco. Sorry, go on.
sorry. No, I was going
No,
to
please
say,
do.
if there is a potential risk to, and I will say this because, in the States, there are some individuals who have reached out about relocation and what is our policy about that. I would say if there is a potential risk to any employee's well-being, I would encourage you, as the person that is being confided in, or that employee, to contact their HR to explore relocation support.
Yeah,
Sorry, guys, I
absolutely.
wanted to get that.
No, don't apologize. I think it's really important. And, even we're currently fleshing out our transitioning at work guidance at ServiceNow. And, we have a section on there around gender inclusive bathrooms. And, we're having to have conversations around, can we explicitly say what we want to say in certain states at the moment, because it's illegal to go into a bathroom that is not the one that was assigned during birth, right? So it's and it's really interesting trying, as an organization, trying to trying to do a one size fits all, because that's what we want, right? We want a standard level of equity for all to be able to enjoy the freedoms that they have within the organization, but actually at the same time trying to understand those local nuances. And it's no different to here in the EMEA region. So I look after Europe, Middle East and Africa, and within that has a whole slew of different kind of levels of progression when it comes to LGBTQ inclusion. Some countries aren't quite there yet from a cultural, traditional and faith aspect. But we also noticed some of those people trying to reach out every now and again. So we ran our own Pride panel in the region just earlier this week with some amazing people with the organization and the lived experience, and someone was asking questions through an anonymous identity element, and being able to just reach that one individual, because we knew that they were in a bit more of a conservative country. Now, of course, we would never encourage anyone to do anything that made them feel unsafe, but they felt that that was enough safe of a space. And internally we then have that LGBTQ only people Teams channel, which they can then join and are safe to do so. So, I think there's lots of more work to be done. I work with my counterpart in the APAC, so the Asia Pacific region as well. And LGBTQ inclusion looks slightly different there as well. So whilst people aren't necessarily, in some countries it's not illegal to come out, there's still that level of uncomfortability in sometimes, but they show huge displays of allyship in organizations and in countries, places like Singapore painting their roads in rainbow colors. So there's kind of a bit of a balance wherever you are. But I think I really lean on that conversation around, it really is about finding those people who are your safe space as well, whatever that might look like, and making sure that we as an organization would never expect people to partake in things if their safety was in concern. We've got a bit more time. We've got a few more questions lined up, but we do have some questions in the chat coming through as well. So let me grab a quick audience question. So I'll pose this one to the panel, but I'm happy to step in as well where needed. What steps can tech companies take to ensure equal opportunities and fair treatment for LGBTQ plus employees throughout the recruitment and promotion processes?
I'm sure there's a checklist somewhere that exists, but I think right now it's the thing that comes to mind is having a diverse panel of interviewers for sure. I think that definitely helps, even though the hiring manager you know, I still, they have the final say, but at the same time, getting the input from other interviewers, um, interview panel participants, I think is truly it's needed, if not already a part of the process, right, during an interview.
Mhm.
And I think I touched on this a little bit earlier, but also, insisting that you're not going to start interviewing until, if you are a hiring manager or you're on the panel, insisting that you're not going to start interviewing until you have a diverse group of candidates, right? And really pushing on your recruitment department to bring that in. And if we're doing something wrong, right? If our requisition is not inclusive in its language, or if we're not targeting, reaching out to communities where folks who have a technical background might, like HBCUs, or, there are lots of places, and I think you have to rely on the community to help reach, that community. But that's a part of something that you have to intentionally do. You can't just put a rec out there and then just expect that you're going to get a diverse panel. You actually have to take additional efforts to reach the communities that you want to serve.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's no expectation of people to share that they are LGBTQ in a recruitment process. So my advice to anyone who's out there who is, part of an organization where they have that ability to, make an impact on those processes, is to make sure everything is just objectively done. So, you should have a really clear marking criteria when it comes to, hiring someone, and measure them against your values, allow them to, show their own creativity and flair in how they then answer that. And if someone does approach you during their recruitment process and says, hey, look, I'm part of an LGBTQ partnership and we're thinking about building a family, what does LGBTQ inclusion look like here? Then maybe that's an opportunity for you to show up and kind of share, what your organization does. Maybe you can introduce them to someone from an employee belonging group or an employee resource group from that community to kind of talk through that. Same with promotion. I really think, at that point in time, hopefully, we've had time to kind of make those relationships with our managers, and our identity is important to us, and so our managers sitting down and talking about our own career kind of path, what it is we want regardless of our identity. And also, I think something that's sometimes missing is the conversation between line managers and their employees around, actually, what does it feel like as someone from the LGBTQ community who's trying to go for a promotion? What do you think the barriers are? Do you feel like you might be unfairly treated because of your identity? And can I show you why we do things objectively, and therefore you can take that out of the equation, that it is about your identity in terms of why you feel you're being treated unfairly. I think sometimes we just don't have those conversations, and it takes courage from a manager, but I think that's also what being a really good manager looks like.
I think, being a visible ally is another, big thing that we can do inside our own tech companies, right? I think it takes bravery as an ally to stand up and say, here's where I stand on this, and to make that, to speak up for those who might not be in the room. An example of that is, when I teach a class, I give my name and pronouns, and I don't ever ask anybody else to share theirs, but if they're comfortable, so that makes it okay, right? If I share mine and I make it okay for others to share theirs, that's something that I can do to make sure folks are inclusive. If I don't know somebody's gender, I never want to assume somebody's gender. So I might, I might just say, hey, my name's Tanya, I use she, her pronouns. If you feel comfortable sharing yours with me, that would be great. And so I don't just assume that I know when I've got a group of folks who are on my class. I ask. I think, the best that we can do, right? So we don't out people accidentally. We don't, we make it a safe space, that we're the safe space. I think that is also huge to include, to provide fair treatment within our own environment.
I think that's so important, Tonya, and it leads really nicely onto my next question here for you as well. It feels like this conversation, a lot of it is around, let's get rid of the assumptions, right? Let's move on, let's broaden our minds beyond those assumptions that we have been kind of, conditioned to see throughout our lives, and those traditional binary structures that we think about, see beyond the label. So Tonya, the power of language and labels, I'd love to hear a little bit more around, how you've tackled that, and some of the practices, the tips and tricks that our audience could probably use as well in terms of challenging language that might exclude others.
Yeah. So, I think as you talked a little bit about, being on a Zoom platform where you can share your pronouns, right? Make yourself a safe space. That's a good one, right? Don't rely on everybody else to share their pronouns with you. You share yours first. I think the other thing is, don't assume somebody's pronouns just because they have long hair or they have a mustache. That doesn't make them a he, right? It doesn't make them a she. It's you don't ever want to assume somebody's gender just because of some, a preconceived notion that you might have of what somebody who uses a he pronoun looks like. So, that includes things like, I don't say the term ladies and gentlemen anymore. When I, start one of my big, I teach classes of hundreds of students. I do, big panels. I do big planning sessions with lots of folks. So I don't ever say ladies and gentlemen anymore. I don't ever say boys and girls when a group of teenagers shows up at my house. I say, hey, lovely people, what's up, high schoolers? I use language that doesn't ever assume anyone's gender. I don't ever make it binary because I never know, honestly. I might have teenagers in my house that are, transgender females, transgender males, non-binary, gender fluid, gender expansive, gender queer. Doesn't matter in my house. They're all safe spaces for them, and I don't ever want to misgender anybody. I think another thing that's really important though is say, okay, I'm actually pretty good at using they, them pronouns now, but it's taken a lot of practice. So I will say, you know what, that's not one I'm super, I'm sorry, not comfortable with. I'm comfortable with it. It's not one I'm super good at. So please correct me if I'm incorrect, right? If I use the wrong pronoun, please correct me. Allow yourself to be corrected. Educate yourself on what those mean. People will often say like, oh, well, they, them, that's a plural pronoun. Go look it up in the English language. It's actually not. You use it all the time when you don't know you see some guy, girl, person walking down the street and they're from the back. You say, oh, hey, you use it all the time. You just don't know it. It's just a conscious exercise in practicing, right? Allow yourself to be corrected, use inclusive language, get rid of the gender binary. Those are all things that we can do right now, today, with anybody in your house. And I guarantee you, even if your teenager isn't gender expansive, one of their friends is, right? And so, practice with your kids, practice with your friends, practice, using your pronouns, sharing those in everyday life. It makes a huge difference. I also think letting people know where you stand at any given time, right? I use my Pride background, regularly all year long, not just during Pride Month, because that makes me a safe space, very visibly to the world so that people don't ever question where I stand. That's something that you can do in everyday life.
Y'all saw that mama bear come out just a minute ago, right? Y'all saw that. It doesn't matter. I love it. See, that's Tanya. This is why we love Tanya. This is why I love it.
And there was another really inclusive one there as well, y'all. So if you're from Texas or anywhere, use y'all.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we use that a lot. And then we're like, hey, y'all, how y'all doing? That rolls off the tongue quite a bit.
So there are some more audience questions, but what we'll do is we'll finish the questions we have, and then we've got one more for this team, and then I'll go to the audience questions. So we've come to the end of the kind of like constructed panel element of this session. So firstly, thank you both so much for sharing your experiences. I mean, I'm always in awe and admiration that we have people at ServiceNow who have such broad lived experiences, but also feel that they're in a space where we can talk about it. It always amazes me, it really does. So thank you to both of you for showing up today. I guess, in terms of advice for our audience, before we go on to the audience questions, what is one piece of advice, and for both of you, one piece of advice you would love to leave our audience with? And it can be anything about breaking a barrier, showing up as an ally in their professional or personal life. What would that be, Marco?
I think from my perspective, it's advocate and celebrate. We had talked about this previously, but for me, it's where there are opportunities for improvement and support of the LGBTQ plus community. Raise your voice, speak to a leader when you're comfortable doing that. But above all, strive for unapologetic celebrating of you being you. not just during Pride Month, but also for the surrounding 335 days in the year. I think that's super important.
That was really quick math, by the way. I was like, how did you get to 335? I was like, oh, it's a whole month. I forgot.
There we go. Listen, I did at least do some traction and addition before this session, so I at least needed that number because I wanted to say that.
And Tonya, over to you.
Yeah, so I love what Marco said about, celebration, but I think all of these things come from a place of awareness, right? And so, I'm super aware by educating myself of what the issues are in my community, that allows me to advocate. I'm super grateful because I realize how far we've come, and like I said earlier, like the fact that, I have a transgender child right now that I can support and get care for and all of those things, that looks much different than it did 30 or 40 years ago when I was growing up. Having the access to care and having access to Facebook groups and being able to have panels like this and be able to have community groups where we support each other, having things like podcasts and panels and books and all those things didn't exist 40 years ago as a parent. And so I'm super grateful that I have access to all of that, but also being aware that there's so much more work to do and so many communities are not where mine is. And so being able to, know what the issues are, know where things stand, being able to be safe in certain environments. I think we still have a long way to go, so we can't let our guard down. We can't stop, advocating, to Marco's point, and really we have to continue that advocacy every day. It takes conscious, purposeful, intentful activity all the time, not just during Pride Month. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. I really appreciate
one of the things that I'm going to call out here is that, this is not being able to live authentically as yourself. A lot of us take that for granted. And a lot of us, 30 or 40 years ago, when we couldn't, right? The life expectancy for somebody who's part of this LGBTQ community is considerably smaller than it is for any other community in the world. The mental health impacts to people in this community of not being able to be themselves and live authentically and work authentically. This is like a life-saving effort. And when I say that, I mentioned earlier that, my family had a pretty big mental health crisis, but you look 30 or 40 years ago, my kid might not be alive today because he didn't feel comfortable coming out and being who he is at home, let alone being who he is at work. So like when I say that this is important, it's literally life-saving important. Like that's where this is at. So, yes, it's nice, and yes, it's, celebration, but it's also like we're talking about people's ability to thrive and live in the world. And like I can't say that loud enough, that being able to be who you are literally can be life-saving to people. So that's how important it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely resonates. I think, I've known people in our community, I think now is such a pivotal time as well where people might be seeing that support slip away, legislation, laws at the moment, this isn't just identity politics, right? It's not just a culture war, it's people's lives, right? It's people's actual livelihoods, it's their future, it's their mental well-being. And people aren't objects, they're people. They're not point scoring things in kind of like legislation or whatever it might be. It's that everyone has the right to live, and everyone has the right to live proudly and in their way. So I think thank you very much. I think we've got 1 minute for a question. We've got one more question coming, which I think might be helpful just to give a quick 30 seconds on. So Marco or Tonya, we talk about how to support the LGBTQ community and be an ally, but what are the best practices to corresponding with employees who may be anti-LGBTQ and who voice those beliefs on workplace platforms? So a very quick 30 seconds.
I recently had this experience on on an internal application that we use to communicate, and it was one of our executives who had posted to open up Pride Month, and there was an individual who shared their a question about what aggressions are you referring to when we talk about the aggressive anti-LGBTQ legislation that's coming down the pipeline and that's already in place. There was multiple moments that we obviously I wanted to just like shake the shit out of this individual, but at the same time I couldn't, right? It's virtual, so we had to rely on numbers and stats and referring to just that information. Eventually the person did say, I appreciate that information and I understand more now, so thank you for being patient with me. So it was just a bit of a full circle. Try to be patient as best you can, and try not to shake the shit out of anybody.
Yeah, thank you, Marco. In the interest of time, we will wrap it up there. Thank you so much to everyone for joining. Sorry if we didn't get to your question. Please do reach out to us on LinkedIn if you do want to ask a question, and we will definitely be more than happy to get back to you on that. But thank you to Power to Fly for having us, and thank you to Tonya and Marco.
Thanks, Naz. This was so wonderful. Thanks for the great conversation. Hope everybody learned something and took something away that they can really take action on in their life.
Yes, thank you to the three of you for that lively, candid, open, and vulnerable conversation. I really appreciate you all. Naz, you did a fantastic job moderating. Thank you all for making the time today. Please come back. I hope we do it again. This was really great.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day.